picking up, I think, where we left off the other day. Actually, correction. I don't remember if it was somebody in my second class or later on in the day. Somebody in my second class commented when I was discussing Judith, and I mentioned that there's a parallel, or might be a parallel, between the Old Testament apocryphal story of Judith and Holofernes, because the poem Judith is in Beowulf, and I said, it's one of the examples possibly of a Liber Monstrorum, a book of monsters, because you have Judith kill a man, etc. And I kind of said, greatest monstrous action, because facetiously, obviously, or sarcastically. The Old Testament story, the canonical one, the one that's in every Old Testament you will open up, is the story of Jael and Sisera. It's not Deborah and, I think I had Jael, or Susanna and Jael. Jael is the Israelite Hebrew woman, maiden. Sisera is a defeated Canaanite general. She sneaks into his tent when he's drunk, takes a tent peg out of the ground, and drives it through his temple. Nails its head to the ground, in other words.
Who did?
Jael. Jael. It's in the book of Judges, chapters 4 and 5. Okay? In the apocryphal story of Judith, and by apocryphal, there's a book called the Book of Judith. It's not in any Protestant Old Testament, for example. It's in the apocryphal Old Testament. Some branches of Christianity include these books in their version of the Old Testament because it was in a lot of versions of the Old Testament in biblical times, for example. And in the story of Judith, Holofernes wants to rape her or something like that. She gets him drunk and beheads him. Okay? So, and in that, the Book of Monsters kind of thing, monster doesn't only have to mean something with 3 heads or a dog head or a face in the middle of the chest. Monstrous can be actions. Okay? Can simply be actions. So, I said the other day that I wanted to come back briefly to the prologue. Prologue's lines 1 through 52. And where is it? Over here. Lines 32 to 42. In the harbor stood a ring-proud ship, icy outbound, a nobleman's vessel. There they laid down their dear Lord, dispenser of rings, in the bosom of the ship, glorious by the mast. That is, they lay him near the mast. Okay? There were many treasures loaded there, adornments from distant lands. I have never heard of a more lovely ship bedecked with battle weapons and war gear, blades and byrnies. In its bosom lay many treasures which were to travel far with them into the keeping of the flood. Your footnote, byrnies, just coats of mail, okay? In, I want to say 1938, because it's just before the outbreak of World War II, and I meant to look it up real quickly. I don't know if this is going to tell me when it was discovered. Yes, 1938, spring of 1938, if I remember correctly. A woman named Elizabeth Pretty or Petty? I don't think this says right at the top. Pretty. Edith Pretty. She owned this land in East Anglia, and on the land are a bunch of these big mounds, burial mounds, barrows, okay? She knew what these things were, that they're burial mounds, that somebody is buried in these. So, she thought she'd have a local archaeologist, a guy named Basil Basingstoke, something like that, excavate one, okay? And so he picked the biggest one. to excavate. He starts excavating, and he notices relatively quickly, do me a favor, put your name on that and pass it around. He notices relatively quickly, grave robbers have dug into this before. When I say big mounds, the largest mound, and I can't remember, I don't think it's number one, but like I said, there's like 50 on this, I don't know, few acres, okay? The largest one is about 50 feet high and over 100 feet in diameter. I mean, it's a big mound. You can go there today, walk all around them, etc. So he starts digging into it, and he notices the ground has been disturbed. Somebody's tried to dig into it before. He keeps going. And he discovers the remains, for lack of a better word, of a ship has been buried in this mound. Let me rephrase that. A ship has been buried in this mound. He discovers the remains. Not any of the wood, all that's rotted. But as he excavates, and he excavates very carefully, the signs of the rivets that tied together the planks that made up the hull of the ship and everything, okay? They have to stop the excavation for a while because of the outbreak of World War II and such. When they finally get back to do it, well, take that back. They discover some things fairly quickly, okay? In the middle of the ship, there was like a cabin of some sorts. And they just discover all kinds of stuff. There's a belt buckle. You've got a picture of it in the pictures in the introduction, right on page 47. That. Solid gold. And it's about that size. And is about, if I remember right, 1/2 inch to 1 inch thick. Okay, so you're talking a lot of gold, all right? And where you see black marks in there, those are actually little teeny tiny inlaid stones. Each one of those little black things, okay? This is done, this is during the so-called Dark Ages that this is produced, right? That's just one of the things. There's that. There are shoulder clasps that hold the front part of a garment to the back part of a garment. There are just all kinds of things, okay? A bag, the remnants of a bag with 43, 45 gold coins, which is very important because that dates when the stuff was put in the ground. Couldn't have been put in before the time when those coins were made. And if I remember right, it's the earliest of the coins dates to very early 7th century, 600, something like that. Okay? Why am I bringing this up? British law, and this still holds true today. British law, take that back, they revised that because of the Antiquities Act. British law at the time held, if you discover treasure on your land, that is land you own, there has to be a coroner's inquest. Coroner has to determine why the material was put there. To determine one of two things. Is it, one, grave goods, or two, if I could learn to write, is it treasure? Okay? So what's the difference between grave goods and treasure? Okay, if there's a body, that makes it more clear. No body was found. English soil is very acidic. Bodies rot pretty quickly. there were chemical analyses of the soil in this cabin, so to speak, or where the cabin was. The walls were all gone, and it's inconclusive. Some say there's more phosphorus than there should be there, which would be an indication of human remains, etc. But nobody's found. But a sword was found, a shield was found, clasps, like rings to go around the wrist were found, just all kinds of things that you would associate with a body, okay? Helmet, part of a helmet was found. I think, no, there's not. Whether you realize it or not, you have probably seen the Sutton Hoo helmet somewhere. It's used in popular culture a lot as an emblem for Vikings or Germanic warriors and such. So you have to have the coroner's inquest to determine one of these two things. Grave goods are items put in the ground to stay in the ground. They're buried with the person for all eternity. Treasure is stuff you put in the ground that you're planning on coming back and getting later. Treasure is what you bury when you're about to be raided. You stick it in the ground, you run away, the other people come, do their stuff, they leave, you go back, you dig up your treasure, you go on with your life. So they have to figure out which of these it is. Again, no body. So they can't immediately say, well, it's grave goods. One of the pieces of evidence introduced into the coroner's inquest were these lines from Beowulf as evidence that this is grave goods. Because the language used here and the items described here, this is the real kicker, eerily match what was found. I mean, there's actually language in here in the Old English, about a standard being raised, like a pole that could hold up either like a flag or possibly candles as a lampstand like thing. It was there. I mean, pretty much everything that's mentioned in Beowulf is there. Okay? And the coroner took all the evidence and said, grave goods. Pretty clear. This wasn't meant to come back out of the ground. And the thing about British law is if it's grave goods, then it belongs to the person in whose land it was found. This is the greatest archaeological discovery in England up to that point. There's another huge one in 2012 called the Staffordshire Hoard, okay, which dates from a little bit later, dates from the Viking period. People buried all that stuff, probably to outsmart the Vikings. That was termed to be treasure. If it's treasure, it belongs to the crown. Now the law's been rewritten. Now you dig up anything, you have to report it to the local authorities. And pretty much anything that's dug up, unless there's a body attached to it, is kind of termed treasure. It belongs to the crown, and what the crown usually does is the crown lets it stay in that local area. It'll go to the local museum. And just about every town in England has a museum of some kind or another. So, grave goods belongs to Edith Creddy, and she almost immediately said, this belongs to the people. This belongs to England. So if you go to the British Museum today, you'll see quite a bit of the Sutton Hoo material there, or if you go to Sutton Hoo in the museum there that they've now since built, some of it will be there, okay? That's all the reason I mentioned it. Sutton Hoo is very fun to go to. I mean, to go through and look at the thing. The ship that was found is 90 feet long and 20 or 30 feet wide. I mean, this is a big ship. The nearest body of water is 2 miles away, downhill. So this ship was, it's assumed, sailed up the River Devon, I think that's it, and then was pulled over rollers, logs, uphill, and then they dug a shallow hole, put the ship in there, and then piled mounds of dirt. I mean, thousands of yards of dirt on top of it, okay? So, Shield gets sent off in this kind of ship. Notice he's not buried, all right? Then we get the first what's called fit. This is just a term, literary term, to describe the division of the manuscript. Okay? We'll see the same thing with Sir Gawain and the Green Knight. Sir Gawain and the Green Knight has 4 fits. Beowulf has 40 something. Okay? They're shorter than the ones in Sir Gawain and the Green Knight. Beowulf and Sir Gawain and the Green Knight are about the same length. Not quite, but pretty close. So, in the prologue, remember, we met Shield-Sheving, and he had a child. The child's name was Beowulf, right? Almost all scholars say the real name is Beow, and the copyist, whoever copied the manuscript at this point, 2 different people write the portion of Beowulf in the manuscript, all right? One of the guys is writing on along, and at line 1938, I think it is, 1938a, the first half of the line, that scribe stops. The second half of the line, the second scribe begins. We have no idea why. It's like scribe A suddenly dies, and scribe B comes in and starts doing things. And scribe B will then go back and make corrections in the first part. Crosses things out, literally erases them, takes a pen, scrapes the letters off the page, writes it over, and we can read what was originally there. Get on Kevin Kiernan's electronic Beowulf. If I haven't linked to it, I will. I think I have. And you can look through various kinds of photography. The underlined letters can be read and stuff. So, then Beowulf Shielding, beloved king, that is, son of Shield-Sheving, whether that means literal direct descendant, father, son, or son in the line of, like grandson, one of those two, was famous in the strongholds of his folk for a long while, his father having passed away, a lord from earth, until after him arose the great Halfdane. Notice, after him arose doesn't mean Beowulf Shielding is father to Halfdane. It just means Halfdane is descended from him. Okay? Halfdane might be historical. There's lots of references to this guy. Okay? Who held the glorious Shieldings all his life, ancient and fierce in battle, and he had 4 children. Look at the genealogical tree that I posted to D2L under the Old English section, Guide to the Characters and Feuds. It has a couple of charts. One of the Shieldings, okay? So it's got, I think I have Halfdane at the top, and etc. And you have 1, 2, 3, 4. Later on, we're going to meet another family, Hrethel, who's going to have 4 children. Okay, so there's kind of a parallel or balance there. And we're going to have Onyentheow, who has not 4, but 2 children. So there's all these families. And you do kind of need to know them because they're going to get involved. Okay? So, Halfdane has 4 children. Harogar, Hrothgar, and Halga the Good. They're listed in order of birth. So Harogar is the oldest son. Hrothgar is the next oldest. Halga, the next oldest. And then we turn the page, and I heard that she's not named. Similarly, when we get to Hrethel, and we read about his children, you have I'm forgetting the first two names for some reason. Balder and Hother. Hathkin, Heribald Hathkin. I have to write it down. Heribald Hathkin, Healak, and question mark. Question mark marries a guy named Edgethal, and they produce Beowulf. Similarly, here we're told question mark marries Onela, okay, which we'll talk about later. This is the guy who's going to come up later on in the poem and is going to be a big part of the problems, let's say, in the poem. I heard that question mark was Onela's queen. Notice, a name is missing from the manuscript here. It has been conjectured from parallel sources, that is from Old Norse sources, okay, that it should be Yrsa or Ursula, okay? Swedish Sylvan king Onela appears later in the story, causing much distress to Beowulf's nation. Yet, interestingly, Onela is going to be, I'm going to suggest, one of those people that phrase "Status Godkinning" is applied to, even though he's an enemy of Beowulf. So, then success in war was given to Hrothgar. Notice what the poet has done. The poet introduces Halfdan, who is the father of Harogar, Hrothgar, Holga, in question mark, and we immediately skip Harogar. Like, he's not important. Why? Because the poem's about, at least the first third, the troubles of Hrothgar. Okay? Sorry, that should not be a thorn, that should be an F. Then success in war was given to Hrothgar, honor in battle, so that his beloved kinsmen eagerly served him until the young soldiers grew into a mighty troop of men. So, he thinks, I've got a mighty troop of men, I should have a mighty hall, where those men can celebrate and feast and all that kind of stuff. So, he has a big hall built, a mead house, line 69, which the sons of men should remember forever. And there within he would share everything with young and old that God had given him, except for the common land and lives of men. So what is that telling us? Remember the Germanic, fourfold Germanic ethic and the Germanic practice, or the relationship between the Lord and Thane. Thane fights for the Lord, Lord pays or gives honor to the Thane by giving out gifts. What have we just been told? He shared everything with young and old. Young and old doesn't mean little toddlers. It means young warriors and the old battle-scarred, grizzled, wizened warriors. The young warriors learn from the old warriors. By the way, our modern English word youth comes from the word for the band of young warriors. Yugatha is that word. So our youths come from the young green warriors, so to speak. So, he distributes treasure to them. What does he not distribute? What doesn't he give out? Common land, that is, the land held by everybody, and slaves. Not a slaveholder. Which the later Vikings were, by the way. So, it's finished. It's proclaimed to all the nations, or to many nations throughout this world. And it comes to pass swiftly among men, as it was soon ready, the greatest of halls, he gives it the name Heorot. Your gloss tells you that just means heart. That is stag. That's what a heart is. Okay? An object recovered from the burial mound at Sutton, who Perhaps royal insignia is surmounted by the image of a heart. The object is a piece of stone about 3 feet tall, kind of oval in shape, flatter and wider. It's about 1.5 inches, 2 inches wide, and about 1/2 inch thick, and it's got round edges. It's got a little like cup on the bottom. And this thing is taken to either be one of 2 things. A whetstone, that is a stone that you'd use to sharpen swords and knives and such on, or a scepter. And the reason it has a cup is so that when the Lord is sitting in his chair, he holds the thing and the cup sits on his kneecap. And it has a stag on the top. Antlers, the whole 9 yards. Okay? So he calls it Herat, and we're told he remembered his boast. Who remembered whose boast? Who's being discussed? Hrothgar. Hrothgar remembered his boast. Now, we're not told what the boast was, but the next line and a half tells us. The boast had to deal with giving out treasure. Go fight for me, and I'll give you all the, And so he gives out rings, treasure at table. Rings doesn't refer to this kind of ring. These are arm rings. Rings worn around the wrist or up here around the bicep. And the more of these you have means the more in favor or the better warrior you are. Okay? The hall towered high and horn-gabled. Horn-gabled just means, if you look at the hall like this, it's got these beams, these timbers that carry over and form like antlers, because it's named stag or heart. Okay? So notice, 81. The hall towered high and horn-gabled. It awaited hostile fires, the surges of war. The time was not yet at hand when the sword hate of sworn in-laws should arise after ruthless violence. Now, what has the poet just done there? Think of time. Foreshadowing, okay? But it's even a little bit more than that. It's the poet talking in the poet's present tense now, relating the glorious deeds of bygone years, right? Of the hall kings, etc. Okay? We see in days of yore, Yardagun, this hall gets built. The hall is now finished. They've had the ribbon cutting ceremony. And in the process of the ribbon cutting ceremony, the poet, looking back on the past, jumps forward into the future, still the poet's past, and says, oh, by the way, while the ribbon is falling to the ground, this whole thing's going to burn to the ground. So, we were told this hall would do what? Make a great meat house, which the sons of men should remember forever. Well, it's a lot easier for something to be remembered forever if it lasts a long time. And seemingly, Herat is not long for this world. Okay? It awaited hostile fires, surges of war. Now that kind of implies, not explicitly, right? I mean, it's just suggested. Where's the war going to come from? Where does war generally come from? Outside. What are the worst kinds of war? What was the United States' worst war it was ever in? The Civil War. More men died during the Civil War than in World War I and World War II combined. United States forces. Okay? So, the time was not yet at hand when the sword hate of sworn in-laws should arise after ruthless violence. And you got a footnote. The hall Herat is apparently fated Well, weird is not used at all in this passage. Apparently, it's fated to be destroyed in a battle between Hrothgar and his son-in-law, ENGL the Heathobard, a conflict predicted by Beowulf in 2024-2069. The battle itself happens outside the action of the poem. Okay? Heathobard. ENGL the Heathobard. We'll talk about that when we get to the poem, when we get later. But, why is this mentioned not even 100 lines into the poem?
Is it kind of like a don't get too comfortable type situation?
Okay, yeah. Why else? Again, what kind of war will this be? You mentioned it. Civil. Go even more about civil.
So is it
Feud?
between the families?
Keep going. And where does that begin in quote-unquote humanity?
And Grendel is a descendant of Cain. Okay.
Cain and Abel. The first murder is what? Brother against brother. Okay? The rot starts from within. Okay? Keep that phrase. The rot starts from within. So, notice what the poet is doing. This is my opinion. I think Beowulf's just about the greatest thing ever written. I'll just make that clear. This is just brilliant what the poet does here. So he introduces, and I'm going to assume it's male poet because more than likely it was. He introduces the idea of family feud, internecine warrior. Okay, so it's father-in-law, son-in-law. So not maybe blood, but it's pretty damn close. And what's the very next thing the poet does? A bold demon who waited in darkness wretchedly suffered all the while. And who's the bold demon going to be revealed to be? Grendel, who is the offspring, many generations removed, of Cain. So, there's going to be family warfare, family feud, and the very next thing he mentions, the descendant of Cain. Why does Grendel wretchedly suffer all the while? For every day he heard the joyful din loud in the hall with the harp sound, the clear song of the Shope. Shope is poet or singer. Okay? Line 5. First of several self-reflexive scenes of poetic entertainment in the poem. Okay? I'm not sure about it being self-reflexive. That is, the poet singing the poem, if you want, if it's orally composed, or the poet composing, writing the poem here isn't referring to himself. He's referring to poets or singers in general. So, what angers Grendel? The song of the poet in the hall, and the joy that it produces. What's the poet singing about? I mean, theoretically, the poet can be singing, the singer can be singing about the depredations of the Grendelkin. No, we're told, he who knew how to tell the ancient tale of the origin of men said, all that just means the singer who, notice, knew how to tell, not who knew the tale. The how to tell, that is, we're going to get an example later in the poem of how a different singer chose one word and bound it to another to create poetry. Think of the alliterative stuff that I had on that one lecture that was on video that I know some of you didn't watch. And I really ought to spend some time, and I might end up doing it. If not today, I'll do it later, to just go over that again, because you really got to understand at least that basics. Question? Okay, I thought you were going to say something. So, the poet said that the Almighty created the earth, a bright and shining plain by seas embraced, and set triumphantly the sun and moon to light their beams for those who dwell on land, adorn the distant corners of the world with leaves and branches, and made life also all manner of creatures that live and move. In other words, it sounds like the poet sings about what? Cadman's hymn, creation. Old English, page 55. Nu schulen herjan heaven reaches weird. Mich tot is machta on his mojethank. Werk wilder vader, swache wunder was. Eetje drichten oor astelda. He strop jelde bernum. Javan trova hali shippend. Tha middenjard man kennis word. Eetje drichten after teada. Fear full done freya almichtia. Now we ought to praise, or have to praise, different possibility, heaven kingdom's guardian, the maker's might and his mind's thoughts, the work of the glory Father, as he of each of wonders, the eternal Lord, established a beginning, meaning created. He first shaped for men's sons heaven as a roof, okay? The holy creator, then middle earth, mankind's guardian, the eternal Lord, afterwards prepared the earth for men, the Lord Almighty. It could be that. I don't think it actually is that, however, because the poet explicitly states how the sun and moon are mentioned. Cadman's hymn doesn't mention the sun and moon. Okay? Doesn't mention the creation of the vegetative world. This does. This sounds to me more like it's taking the opening chapters, the poet who's singing has taken the opening chapters of Genesis and taken out the good juicy parts, light and dark, sun and moon, stars, plants, animals, etc. Okay? Thus this lordly people lived in joy blessedly until one began to work his foul crimes, a fiend from hell. The Old English there is, if I remember right, literally like 101. Yeah, it's literally Feond on Hella, a fiend from hell. A fiend from hell sounds like what? What kind of being? A demon. Describe a demon. I don't mean, Sam Smith and Grammys kind of thing. Describe a demon. Malicious? What else? What's it look like?
We don't actually know. It possesses bodies.
It can't possess a body. Why don't we actually know what a demon itself looks like? Spirit. It lacks materiality. It's not a physical being. Okay? So the people lived in joy until a fiend from hell. This grim spirit was called Grendel. We're not told who called it that. It's just, it was called Grendel. Grendel, it is suggested by some, may come from the Old English verb grindon, to grind. Because how does Grendel kill people? He grinds them in his mouth. He eats them whole, by the way. Which tells us something also about Grendel's size. He's not like us, size-wise, okay? So, the grim spirit was called Grendel, mighty stalker of the marches. Mera, which means great or powerful, Merchsteppa. I mentioned that word before. The march stepper. Why does he live in the marches? And another pronunciation, there's actually two other pronunciations of that. Marks, that is the mark, as in the north mark, the east mark. It means territory that separates this from this, like boundary. Another word related is marsh. So he lives on the boundary and in the marshes. What's another word for marshes? swamp. Americans think swamp. Brits would think fen, F-E-N, okay? Like Slytherin from Slimy Fin, rolling rates, okay? Mighty stalker of the marches who held the moors and fens. Now we're told he's a man. So what is he? Is he a fiend from hell, a grim spirit, or this miserable man? Lived for a time in the land of giants. We're not told where that is. After the Creator had condemned him among Cain's race. Interestingly, go pick up Kevin Kieran's book, Beowulf and the Beowulf manuscript. The word there that I can't think of an edition that does not give this reading. The word there that is transliterated Cain's in the manuscript, it actually reads this. So you have C-A, and then you have C-A-N-E-S. See, what's the difference between this and this? Each of these is called a minim in paleography. So those are just minims. If you connect them, you get what? You get different letters. So you have N and U, and if you do this, you have M. Okay? There's a connector between this first minim and the second minim. Manuscript reads C-A-M-E-S. Doesn't read C-A-I-N. Okay? Yeah, pretty sure the E is there. Why is that important? Well, Cain's isn't a word. It's not a name. Which is why almost every editor puts C-A-I-N plus context. Context is clear, right? This is referring to Cain, son of Adam, who killed his brother Abel. But this can work. Because this means battle. Warfare. Conflict. In battles, race, in conflicts race, in warfare's race. In other words, a child of war. Well, Grendel is a descendant of war or conflict. So, after the Creator had condemned him among Cain's race, when he, Cain, killed Grendel, notice, the eternal Lord avenged that death. How did the Lord avenge Abel's death? Did he kill Cain? No. He marked Cain, and that mark gets passed on to the Grendelkin, and to all the other monsters of the world, it's assumed. The Orkneys, the Ilva, giants, they all ultimately descend from Cain. Okay? Notice who avenged Abel's death. God did. Why didn't Adam?
Because that would be more like kinslaying if you were to try and do it.
Good. We're going to see later on in the poem, a father, him, is going to die of a broken heart because he can't avenge the death of one of his sons who was killed by his brother. By the way, that death, the son and the brother, are probably related to the Old Norse brothers, Hother and Balder. And it's when Hother kills Balder that causes Ragnarok. So we have Germanic mythology embedded, along with Christian mythology, you could say, embedded within the poem. Okay? So Adam couldn't avenge that. But God does. No joy in that feud. We're 109 lines into 3,182 lines. And the poet has just introduced the word feud. And yet, according to some editions, feud is at the periphery of the poem. No joy in that feud. The Maker forced him far from mankind for his foul crime. Right? What happened to Cain? He was sent east into the land of Nod, whatever that means, and wherever that means. From thence arose all misbegotten things, that is, from Cain. And we get the names of them. Trolls and elves. Thanon und Tidras eala onwoken. From thence awoke all Tidras, unlike things, essentially. Eatanas, giants. Ilva, elves. Orkneas, Tolkien's orcs, because we don't know what Orkneas meant in Anglo-Saxon. It's not troll, because trolls are probably the Draugr of Old Norse, etc. Swilcha gigantes. Wait, he's already mentioned giants. Interestingly, Eatanas is the Old English word for giant. Gigantes comes from Latin through Old French. Wait, is that right? No, I think it comes directly from Old Latin. Okay? Thawith goda wunen langa thraga. And also the giants who strove against God for a long while. You've got a footnote there, list a collection of Germanic classical biblical horrors. All are ultimately traced to their biblical roots though the characters in the poem are not aware of this. Okay? Notice what the editor is telling us. Editor translator Roy Luza. What he's telling us. Nobody in the poem, in the world of the poem, Beowulf, Hrothgar, etc., know that Grendel and all these other monsters are descended from Cain. How do we know that? Or do we know that? I think the assertion is made because we never hear a character within the world of the poem mention that heredity. The poet is not within the world of the poem. The poet is telling us the poem. All right? I think it's a safe assumption, but it is an assumption. It's not proven. So the giants strove against God for a long while. He gave them their reward for that. What was the reward God gave to the giants? Pardon? Vengeance.
They're striving against him.
Later on in the poem, well, there's two things actually. Later on in the poem, Beowulf's going to discover a sword. He's going to use that sword to kill Grendel. And then he's going to bring the hilt of the sword back out from where Grendel lived, and he's going to present it to Hrothgar. And Hrothgar's going to look at the sword, and the poem's going to say, and Hrothgar Mavaloda. Mavaloda is a fancy word. It means delivered in oration, like he gave a speech. And then for, I think it is like 17 lines, Hrothgar doesn't speak. He gave a speech, and then we're told what Hrothgar reads on the hilt of the sword. And it's about the ancient strife of God versus the giants, and how God destroyed them in a flood. Parallel between Germanic mythology, Judeo-Christian mythology. Noah's flood, guess what? There's a flood in Germanic mythology that they used to try to wipe out the frost giants, as there is in every culture on earth. For some reason, every culture, every mythology has a flood story. Okay? So God gave them their reward for that. The Noah story begins after what are we told in the book of Genesis? We get a reference to, in Genesis, to the Nephilim. These are the sons of God who go into the daughters of men. And the way most critics, commentators read that is, these are demonic beings, fallen angels, who have sex with women. Like, pagan Greek Roman mythology. Okay? Zeus, he's not just daughters of men, swans and cows and goats and everything. This is where giants come from. And the giants are part of what is destroyed in Noah's flood. So, Fit 2. So before Fit 1, we get the prologue. Fit 1 introduces us to the Shieldings in the person, at least, of Hrothgar, okay? The building of Herod and the coming of Grendel. Fit 2. When night descended, he went to seek out the high house. He who? Well, who was all of that long passage ultimately going back to? Grendel. He went to seek out the high house to see how the Ringdanes had bedded down after their beer drinking. And notice you're going to get a lot of different terms to describe the Danes. You're going to get the Ringdanes, you're going to get the Victory Danes, you're going to get the East Danes, you're going to get the Spear Danes. I think East Danes. I don't think they're ever called the West Danes or North Danes, or I think they were called the South Danes at one part. So, notice, after they had, when they had bedded down, after their beer drinking, 117. How the Hringdane, who hit Hringdana after Berethea Yebun Havden. How the Ringdanes, after beer imbibing, had gone to sleep. Why mention after the beer drinking? That's exactly it. What kind of beer drinking? Lots of it. There's one thing that's going to continually be said about the Danes. They're drunken sots. That sun starts to dip. It's break out, the beer. And every night they break out the beer. So that when Beowulf comes in, he's going to make a comment about their drunkenness. It really surprises me, and you'll see, when we get to it, some of the things Beowulf is allowed to get away with saying. So, he found therein a troop of nobles asleep after the feast. They knew no sorrow or human misery. Why not? Dead to the world. And pretty soon, they're going to be dead to the world. They are wasted. The unholy creature, grim and ravenous, was ready at once, ruthless and cruel. He took from the rest 30 things. Thence he went, lost my place, rejoicing in his booty. I hate that half line, how he translated that. Rejoicing in his booty, line 124. Yeah, I understand it, but anyways, rejoicing in his booty, back to his home to seek out his abode with his fill of slaughter. Okay? So the first night he comes, kills 30 men, takes them all away. Okay, just logistically, wrap your mind around this. How does the miserable man, and the Old English there for miserable man, a few lines earlier, the line 104 is one Sally where. Okay? How does he carry away 30 people? Because he's huge. He has a bag. It's going to be described later. That he carries around his shoulder, like a man purse. Pretty cool, because the bag's made out of dragon skin. How do you get a dragon skin? You go around through the forest and look where a dragon has sloughed off its skin like a snake should. No, you kill the dragon. Okay? So, morning light appears. People go into the hall. And Grendel's warfare was made known to men. Then lamentation was lifted up after the feasting, a great morning sound. Unhappy sat the mighty lord, long good nobleman. He suffered greatly, blah, 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 blah. Okay, let me back up for just one moment. I do this intentionally. From when Heorot had its grand opening, how much time passed before Grendel came?
One night.
Is there proof of that? No, there's not. But it sounds like it's soon.
Well, it says for every day he heard the joyful din out of the halls. I don't think it's a span of time.
Okay? We're not told how long yet. We are going to be told later. It's 50 years. Okay? Just let that sit there. So now Grendel comes, he takes his first 30. And what does Hrothgar do? Line 129. Unhappy sat the mighty lord, long good nobleman. He suffered greatly, grieved for his thanes. Once they beheld that hostile winds tracks, the accursed spirit, that strife was too strong, loathsome, and long. Okay, notice, he is a long good nobleman. What does long good mean? For a long time. Or he was good for a long time. He's not a young man at this point. Fourfold Germanic ethic: duty to one's lord, duty to one's kin, duty to avenge one's lord or kin, and then weird. That third part, duty to avenge one's lord and kin. Who does that apply to? Thanes. Who else? The Lord. The Lord has a responsibility and duty to avenge his people if they are attacked. What should Hrothgar be doing?
Not sitting.
Not sitting, thank you. He should be arming up. And instead, he's sitting. He suffered greatly. He's grieving for his things. And then we're told, line 134b, it was no long wait, but the very next night he committed a greater murder, more not at all for his feuds and sins. He was too fixed in them. Who's the he? It's not Hrothgar. Grendel comes back the next night. Then it was easy to find a Thane who sought his rest elsewhere. That is, after the second night, some of the Thanes are going, I think I'll go down to Howard Johnson's and spend the night. I'm not going to sleep in Heorot tonight. Bad juju, there, so to speak. A bed in the outbuildings, when they pointed out, truly announced with clear tokens, the Hall Thanes hate. What are the clear tokens of the Hall Thanes hate? The Hall Thane here is not Hrothgar's Thanes. No, it's Grendel. Why is Grendel called a Hall Thane? Because he controls the hall at night. It's also his hate for Hall Thanes. Okay? You got a footnote down there. Hrothgar's hall is apparently surrounded by smaller buildings, etc., including the women's quarters. Under normal circumstances, the men sleep together in the hall, ready for battle. This would imply, that statement would imply that Hrothgar only has a posse comitatus of maybe 50 men? No. He has a whole lot more than that. Why? Because it's going to be implied, this goes on. Grendel comes every night for 12 years. And it's implied 30 men a night. Do the math. 30 times 365 times 12. So 360 times 365. It's a big number.
First one's a fluke, second one's a coincidence. Get out of there.
Yeah, pretty much. Okay? He who escaped the fiend held himself afterwards farther away and safer. So he ruled. This is Grendel, not Hrothgar. So he ruled and strove against right, one against all, until empty ENGL, that's that word that we saw in Wanderer and Seafarer, until empty stood the best of houses. And so it was for a great while, for 12 long winters. And you'll see in Anglo-Saxon literature, time is counted by winters. Why? Because if you can live through the winter, you got one more under your belt. You know, living through the summer, that's easy. Harsh, cold winters, that says you've got some hardiness to you. Okay? 12 long winters, the Lord of the Sylvans suffered his grief, every sort of woe, great sorrow. Notice, it doesn't stop. He suffers all that when to the sons of men it became known and carried abroad in sad tales that Grendel strove long with Hrothgar, bore his hatred, sins and feuds for many seasons, perpetual conflict. When does Hrothgar really suffer? When his reputation is damaged. When songs reach other people talking about Hrothgar the Great and Heorot destroyed by Grendel. Not physically destroyed, but, at night. He wanted no peace, that is, Grendel wanted no peace with any man of the Danish army, nor ceased his daily hatred, nor settled with money. Settled with money is talking about weregild. The Anglo-Saxon practice was, if I accidentally kill Devon's parents could come to me and say, pay the price. And there was an actual, like an actuarial table in the Anglo-Saxon laws for whatever your position was in society, there was a certain amount. Guess who you owed the most for? King. You kill the king, that's a lot of money. You kill the lowest person on the totem pole, it's not that much. Like, a baby accident, whatever. Okay? But Devon would be there somewhere. And they come to me and I could say, I'm so sorry, hand the money over, I'm clean. Debt free. If I say, hello, I'm not paying for that, I become outlaw. The law no longer protects me from your family. And your family can do whatever they want. It can be a quick death, or it can be long, slow, drawn out, death. So, Grendel won't agree to pay. Look at it from Grendel's perspective. And if you want to look at Beowulf from Grendel's perspective, read John Gardner's Grendel, written in 1972 or so. Gardner was an Anglo-Saxon scholar. It's a horrible book, I think. Used to be taught all the times in high schools and in colleges. And it's because, the reason I say it's a horrible book, it's an existentialist take on the poem written from Grendel's perspective. Well, we can't know Grendel's perspective because we don't get hardly anything of Grendel's interiority in the poem. So it's more John Grendel's perspective, John Gardner's perspective. So, he wouldn't settle with money, nor did any of the counselors need to expect bright compensation for the killer's hands. Counselors, those are Hrothgar's counselors. Those are his advisors. They're saying, he's not going to pay us. Just quit trying. It's like leaving a notice. Grendel, please meet me at the oak tree for, consultations for ransom, so to speak. For the great ravager relentlessly stalked, a dark death shadow lurked and struck old and young alike. In perpetual night held the misty moors. Men do not know whither such whispering demons wander about. And I think that last line and a half, that is entirely for the spooky factor. I can't help but hear that and think, the poet, the singer of this poem, now has everybody's attention, and they're in a rapture. And he kind of goes, ooh, and does that line. And they're looking around. I mean, if you think of this as having been composed 700, 800, 900, and it's being recited in a hall, and the hall's not brightly lit, it's lit by a fire, literally in the floor, in the middle of the hall, smoke rising up, going through a hole in the ceiling. And so, a few feet away from that, it's dark, it's shadowy, it's a little smoky, and they hear noises outside the hall. Grendels lurking, Thus the foe of mankind, fearsome and solitary, often committed his many crimes, cruel humiliations. He occupied Herat. Okay, occupied. He took control. In other words, at nighttime, what does he do that is similar to someone else that has already been mentioned in the poem? What are we first told about Shield Chevy? He deprived others of their mead benches. Well, Grendel's depriving them of their meat benches too. He saw no need to salute the throne. He scorned the treasures. He did not know their love. You got a gloss. This is a much disputed passage. My reading follows a suggestion made by Fred C. Robinson in Why is Grendel's Not Greeting the Yifstol Arak Mitchell? And repeated in Mitchell and Robinson's Beowulf. Okay? Fred Robinson, Bruce Mitchell, they did an edition of Beowulf together that pretty popular in college classrooms and such. So those two lines in the Old English actually read, hold on a second. I meant to write this down earlier. Actually read, not he that I'm going to put two things, give stool, throne, to greet, was able, treasures, before, the Lord or Creator, nor his love knew. So, how did it begin? It began with one. Oh, that is where it begins. He was not able to greet that gift. That's in modern syntax. This is the Old English syntax. So, not he that gift stool or throne to greet was able. Put that in modern English. He was not able to greet that throne. What is meant by to greet? What do we mean by to greet? Leuser translates that salute. What do we mean by salute? Honor or respect? Possibly. What do we mean by to greet?
To recognize.
Okay. What do we really mean by to greet? Hi, my name's Ted, yours. It's that kind of thing. So Grindel was not able to go up and say, hello, Mr. Thrawn, I'm Grindel. I'm being facetious, obviously. Other translations say he was not able to approach. Because in order to greet someone, what do you have to do? You have to approach them. You have to get up to them. Okay? He was not able to approach that gift stool or throne. And the reason I have gift stool or gift stool here, in Russian, there is a word, prestol, and it's the word for altar or throne. Okay? Germanic, in the Indo-European languages, Germanic is a branch, Balto-Slavic, the Baltic languages and the Slavic languages are a branch, Italic is a branch, Celtic is a branch, Hellenic is a branch, etc. Of all the Indo-European languages, Germanic and Balto-Slavic are like closer brothers than Germanic and Celtic, or Germanic and Italic. For example, they've got the same word for God. They've got vocabulary words that are related, that aren't related to the other Indo-European languages for some reason. And they do some things, also grammar-wise, that are similar that the others don't, which indicates those two big language groups originally probably were a smaller subset, and they broke off together and then separated away from the others. Okay? But you have press, stole, gift, stole, stool, stool, and these words both mean gift. So I would check. I need to do a lot more research on this. It seems to me that the poet might be suggesting that the throne is like an altar. Okay? Grindel can't approach it, even if it's not an altar. Grindel can't approach the throne. Why? Well, then you get this line. Treasures, literally, that means treasures. Okay? For means before, in front of. God, the Lord, Creator, nor his love knew. This is crystal clear. And this is pretty much crystal clear, with the exception of how are you going to translate Graton. This is the part that's a little less clear. On its surface level, it's very clear. This is literally what it means. Question is, what's it mean in the context? Because what are the treasures before the Lord? Because notice, whenever you have a UM, it's dative plural. Dative, indirect object. Okay? And plural. Guess what? That's one of the similarities with the Slavic languages. All the Slavic languages, to indicate dative plural, it ends with the sound. Same thing in the Germanic. That pretty much connects on its own. This is treasures, not treasure. Grammatically, what would we say? If this is rephrasing this, then it should be what? It should be singular. Or this should be plural. He was not able to greet the thrones. What kind of society has thrones when you have a king? It's not like big king, little king, me, mini, me. This is commonly used, plural, commonly used also to reference a singular. Heavenum for heaven, not heavens. Heavens refers to the sky, planets, stars, all that kind of stuff. It can also, heavenum, the place, heaven. This is what this thing is kind of restating. This is the treasure before the Lord. And we kind of have, notice that it's not the same. Kind of have an idea of like, notice all my qualifications, the divine right of kings. Where does the divine right of kings really get its origin, its source?
Is it bloodlines? Like,
Well, that's the law of primogeniture, eldest son, etc. From God. How so? Romans. A lot of people say, oh, it's from Saul. Book of Judges. God tells, Samuel, anoint Saul. The only reason in the book of Judges God does that is because the Israelites are griping and moaning that they're not like all the other surrounding tribes. They don't have a king. We want to be like the others. Like children, right? Well, so-and-so's mommy, let's be. And God finally gets fed up with them. Says, you want a king? Fine. Here's what's going to happen. Interesting. Go back and read that passage in Judges. One of the first thing he mentions, you're going to get taxed. It just blows my mind. You're going to get taxed, and you're going to have to go to war against these other. Okay, we want a king. Fine, have your king. Okay, treasures before the Lord, throne instituted by God. That's what Romans says. All government. That doesn't mean all quote unquote Christian government. It means whatever. Soviet Union. Okay, they call. So, this is this. Notice, Grendel can't approach it. He can't get close to it. Why? Grendel, Cain, God. Like Hrothgar has been placed. You might think, that's pretty tenuous. Where's your basis? Wait till we get to what's called Hrothgar's homily, around line 1700 or so, where Hrothgar's going to give a homily. There's no other way to read these lines. He's preaching. He's not preaching to the choir, because the people out there don't understand a lot of what he's saying. Okay? But Hrothgar's going to make it clear God put him in that position. All right? Because bear in mind, oldest brother, he died. That's why he gets become king. Over here, older brother, third, he kills him. Oops, kinslaying, bad juju for the whole family. Okay, he then dies in battle. He becomes king, his son, etc., etc. So, Tolkien has a horrible translation for this dude. I don't understand why Old English scholars he couldn't greet that throne. Oh, and this other part. The treasure before God, nor his love knew. Knew here isn't intellectual. It's felt, it's experienced. You can almost put yavad. This is also why he can't approach the throne. He doesn't have God's favor. In fact, we're going to be told in just a few moments. No, not just 2 moments. After Beowulf arrives and Grendel approaches, we're going to be told, he bara godis ira. He bore God's ire. And we'll talk about that when we get to it. So, that was deep misery to the Lord of the Danes, crushing his spirit. The fact that Grendel holds sway in his court every night, his hall, right? Many a strong man sat in council, considered advice, what would be best for the brave at heart to save themselves from the sudden attacks. And at times, the poet tells us, beginning line 175, they offered honor to idols in pagan temples. They prayed aloud that the soul slayer, look at your footnote, the devil, it's Saulabanan, that the soul slayer might offer assistance in the country's distress. Help us, Satan, defeat your servant Grendel. Jesus, a house divided itself cannot stand. If Beelzebub be divided, So that's not going to work. Such was their custom. Who's speaking? The poet. Who's the poet? A Christian looking back on Yeyardogum. Okay? And this Christian says, such was their custom. Let me back up for a moment. Line 179, which reads, 178, swilch was their hera, such was their custom, heathenra hicht. The hope of heathens. It's interesting that the user translates heathenra as heathen. Why? What does heathen mean? What's the difference between heathen and pagan? They're not the same.
Is heathen like intentionally saying like intentionally like going against God?
Yes. Heathens only exist in contrast to Christian. You can't say that about pagans. Pagans are just people who don't know. Okay? That's the difference. That's the distinction. And the poet says, this was their heathen custom. Like, they should have known better. Not that they are apostate, had been Christian and fell away. But it's almost like the poet is suggesting they knew the truth, so to speak. Okay? The hope of heathens, and it's literally remembered hell in the Old English. They remembered hell in their minds. They did not know the Maker, the Judge of deeds. They did not know the Lord God, or even how to praise the Heavenly Protector, the Wielder of glory. Woe unto him. Gnomic passage. Woe unto him who must thrust his soul through wicked force in the fire's embrace. Expect no comfort. This is Wenen ne frovra. Or Wena ne frovra. Wena, expect, like Iween, if you've ever heard of that very old verb. No comfort, no way to change at all. Okay, let me pause there. Everything from essentially 175 to 188, a lot of scholars, I won't say a majority, but a lot of scholars think is added to the poem. This is something that some later Christian scribe tucks in to Christianize it. Okay? I don't think that's the case at all. For the simple reason of two of the things that are discussed here. So they did not know the Lord God. That's like, it follows very well after this. Grendel didn't know God's love, etc., etc. The Judge of deeds, or how to praise the heavenly kingdom, wielder of glory. Woe unto him who must thrust the soul through wicked force in the fire's embrace. Notice, the person who thrusts his soul into the wicked fire's embrace, what does that pretty clearly refer to? That's hell. That's the Christian idea of hell. Okay? Expect no comfort, no way to change at all. Okay? It's 9:24. Very soon, like within the next 100 lines or so, we're going to be told Hrothgar never expected any change. He always expected every night Grendel's going to come ravage the hall. Nothing's ever going to change. That's why he just sits on his ass all day long and mourns. He's totally depressed, as it were. He sees, expects no comfort. Now, one of the things the poet might be suggesting is that those who don't expect any comfort to come, those who don't expect things to ever get better, are experiencing what? Now.
Hell.
Hell. That's the fire's embrace. It's not literal. Might as well be. I mean, talk to somebody really, really suffering from PTSD, and it becomes pretty clear. They're in hell, okay? But, now, we'll pick up with 186, the It Shall Be Well, on Tuesday. So we're like, what, 1,500 lines behind? It's okay. We'll catch up by May.